Ay, boy. Mas muna.
Balik ka konti dito, Chin.
Nandito. Ito mo. Higop ko to lahat to. Tignan mo to. The Crusader class makes a comeback and gets to be played the way it was meant to be played. Hello everyone. My name is Chin Valdes and today we are going to be talking about the ultimate tank Royal Guard build.
Someone hurts. I think it's the arcade.
I don't feel anyone.
What?
Even before Ragnarok Origin was launched, I was already eyeing the Crusader class. Because in all other Ragnarok games that I've ever played, all the way back to 2003, I've always used wizards or monks all the way back from classic Ragnarok and even going into Ragnarok Mobile or Eternal Love. So with the coming of Ragnarok Origin, I really wanted to try the Crusader as a tank class. But I was so disappointed when the Paladin class came and it just became a complete bruiser. And the tank class couldn't be more far from the meta unless you're part of a Whale or Kraken heavy guild. So with the coming of the Royal Guard, I'm so happy we're finally able to play a real tank class. So in this video, we're going to be talking about our build and also how we play the Royal Guard in PvP. So starting off with our stats. So you would primarily want to focus all on vitality and intelligence. Warlocks are heavily the meta right now. So as a tank class, you would definitely want to be able to survive against them. So you need to heavily invest in intelligence and magic defense or magic damage reduction. Vitality, of course, for our HP and our physical defense. So right now we are sitting at 462,000 max HP. We put a little bit of dexterity because we do miss sometimes. So I just added just a little bit of dexterity just to make sure that our attacks land. The rest we put into strength and I put a few points into luck just because I don't like having leftover points. So that's the only reason. Otherwise, I probably would have put it into dexterity or strength. So right now we're sitting at around 245% physical damage reduction, 230% magic damage reduction, 5,596 PvP reduction, and 3,918 PvP damage bonus. So we did have to make a few adjustments with our feather setup. No, we did have to sacrifice a few stats of PvP damage bonus to be a little bit more tanky. So we'll be discussing that later on as we move on to our feather setup. For equipment, of course, we're using the Goiben set. So the Goiben set is still hands down the tankiest equipment set that we have available. So this is definitely what we're going to be using as a tank. Gives us some movement speed, a lot of resistances, and a lot of HP. So we're going to be using the Goiben set. For the shield, we're using the Naga Scale Shield. So even as paladins back then, this is one of the most OP pieces of equipment that a paladin class or a crusader class can equip. It's the Naga Scale Shield. It allows you to go toe-to-toe with higher DP, physical DPS jobs. It also helps you quite a bit against magic damage, in which case I mentioned warlocks are heavily the meta right now. So this will help you also quite a bit. But otherwise, you could also go for something like the Holy Guard or even the Atomic Barricade. For the weapon, we're using the Divine Spear. So as I would be demonstrating later on, we will be showing you guys that my playstyle, my own preference is to play with more crowd control. So the 10% chance to inflict petrify is pretty good considering we do deal AoE damage. We also get a heal once every 120 seconds, which is very much welcome, as well as a whopping 30% max HP at plus 15. Another really good option is also the Piercing Spear. So now the Piercing Spear gives you a lot of damage reduction and also gives you some movement speed. It also makes you a bit more sturdy by giving you a shield that's equivalent to 10% of your max HP. So both weapons are actually pretty good. You'd be a little bit more sturdy with the piercing spear, but you get extra crowd control from divine spear because of the chance to petrify. But you can't go wrong with either weapons, and both weapons are very good. For accessories, I think one of the best, if not the best one to get, is the magic stone ring. So you would be using 2 of these. So this is the defensive equivalent of the pendants. So usually the pendant of chaos is the best for physical DPSs, just as pendant of harmony is the best for magic DPS jobs. So for the tank class, the magic stone ring is more or less the best for the tank class. But also, I have to point out that also the level 105 accessories, Elf King's Warrior Gloves and Elf King's Golden Apple is also a pretty good combination. So you get vitality, damage reduction, healing taken, but the set effect is so good. So upon dealing or taking damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a shield for 20 seconds, which is negligible. No shield would last for 20 seconds. That absorbs damage up to 10% of your max HP. While affected by the shield, your armor element is converted to holy. So this is also a very strong accessory set. So if you have these, definitely go for these. Later on down the line, when we're given the divine armament accessories, we can go for 2 pieces of magic stone rings. But even against these level 115 accessories, I think the Elf King set is still pretty good. In terms of sustain and survivability, I don't think it would be like too big of a difference. And you can't go wrong with either one. Both are still very good. So right now, I only have the Elf King's Golden Apple. I don't have the glove yet. You can get the glove from Mutant Dragon. But since I don't have the set yet, I'm still using my old Dark Knight belt. So I was using these belts from when I was still using Sacrifice Paladin. They don't have a set bonus, but they have pretty good stats that are very useful. So you get max HP, physical damage reduction, some magic defense, and vitality from these. So they're very handy, very trusty, just gives you straight on stats. So I prefer to go for 2 of these instead of the Dark Knight set. But even if you did go for the Dark Knight glove and you were chasing down the Fortitude of the Dark Knight set bonus, it's also still pretty good. So like I said, there wouldn't be like too huge of a difference. You could go for either one and you wouldn't be wrong for going for either one. Now for cosmetic accessories, I'm using the octopus hat. So it's been one of my favorite headwears ever since, even when I was using Paladin back then. I'm using the strawberry bear cookie for my mouthwear, the Christmas box for my face wear. So this is very OP face wear. Upon taking damage, you gain a shield that absorbs damage up to 15% of your max HP. And PvP damage reduction is increased by 200. So it's a very solid face wear. But otherwise, I would probably be using Luna Glyph or Checker Sticker. You know, there are a lot of pretty good face wears, but this is definitely one of the best out there. For the backwear, I'm using the Mirror of Fate, but there are also a lot of really good backwears. Other pretty good backwears are the Sunny and Sky, the Horn Bunny, and the Strawberry Bear Gacha. For the costume, I'm currently using Floral Elf, but there are also a few other costumes that are pretty good. You could also go for Fashion Stroller or the Strawberry Bear. For enchants, it's very straightforward. You just go for PvP technique for wherever available. So that's gonna be on your backwear, your costume, and your headwear. And you go for damage reduction, whether physical defense or magic defense, respectively, on the rest of your equipment. And of course, Fighting Spirit or Melee Boon for your weapon and accessories. So same as our previous build with the Critical Royal Guard, the Tank Royal Guard also isn't too heavily dependent on cogwheels, unlike our Rune Knight before. There aren't really too much expert effects that you have to go for this tank build at least. So you know, this is a tank role that we're building right now, so that we don't really need too many damage modifying cogwheel effects. So for feathers, since we are just transitioning from a DPS class like the Rune Knight, we're still working on our complete feather setup, but the goal is to hit something like this. So we're gonna be going for time, space, light, dark, and grace for our attack feathers. and Nature, Divine, Terra, Night, and Virtue for our defense feathers. So it's still a work in progress. We haven't been able to do it for the rest of our feather setup, but that's gonna be eventually the goal. For sigils, just go for any defensive sigil of your choice. So this all comes down to preference. It really depends on your playstyle and also depends on what sigils you have been working on. But this does go for all and every job. You know, like for every job, even if you are a DPS class, you would normally want to go for defensive sigils in PvP. But right now, these are the ones that I have on. I'm using Courage Blessing, I'm using Immortal Body, Surging Protection, and Swift Breakout. For the active sigil, well, I am using Oblivion right now, or Frozen World. But normally, you'd want something like a Radiant Guardian or a high-level Photon Burst. For Nexus Engine talents, as I have also previously mentioned in our Critical Royal Guard video, the Royal Guard in general is not too dependent on Nexus Engine talents. So they're not dependent on cogwheels or Nexus Engine talents. Unlike the Rune Knight, you know, the Rune Knight was definitely and heavily dependent on cogwheels and Nexus Engine talents, but not the Royal Guard. But for which case, for our PvP build, the ones you would want are Overwhelming, Absolute Domain, Unyielding, and Divine Shield Bliss. But again, you know, like these Nexus talents won't be too impactful for your playstyle, but they would still help to some extent. So for the Nebula path, it's very straightforward. A lot of the PvP nodes that you would want are below the x-axis, so they're right over here. But I want to point out this very important Emir Steer. So this is probably one of the most OP Emir Steers I've seen so far. So the tier 4 Emir Steer for Mighty Defender, or the level 80 Emir Steer, when you enter the defense stance, you heal for 40% HP, and entering attack stance grants you control immunity effects for 5 seconds. So it's basically a 3-second downtime for being immune to all crowd control effects, and also healing your HP for 40% every 8 seconds. So 8 seconds is the cooldown for switching stances. So this is pretty OP. Now, probably one of the best Emir Steer skills I've seen so far. Now, very overpowered. For cards, it's very straightforward. You just go for the usual PvP cards. The Tharafrog cards. Right now, we're using Jack, Dustiness, Raedric cards. You know, the usual cards that we normally use for PvP. So nothing new. It's still pretty much the same. You can't really switch presets with mount traits, so we're still using the same as our previous build. So of course, we're going for Brave, Clever, Fierce, and Cute. So I've explained this several times with our Rune Knight builds and also our previous Royal Guard build. Statues are also the same. You know, we also don't have statue presets, and progression is very linear. So of course, you just level everything up as you progress through the game. And same thing with medals. So now it's even more important again to get more physical and magic damage reduction from medals of Charm and Tempest. So we're working on those right now. But as I've mentioned also in our Critical Royal Guard build, it's very imperative that you get a healthy balance of pretty much everything. Whether on Medals of Glory or Medals of Faith, all around. You know, these are all stats that you're going to be using for every content in the game. We're still using the same pets for PvP as our previous Royal Guard build. So we're still using Genesis or si Buffer ni Chin. We're using 1-1 or Ochin po ni Chin. Also very powerful PvP pet. We're using Bouncer ni Chin or Earth Lord. And best support, you know, I can't emphasize this enough. Sohi is such a very good PvP pet. Sohi just has a lot of utility. In PvP, we don't really benefit too much from her lifesteal and even much less from her attack speed because we are using a tank class. But the movement speed buff is pretty good. We do need that for PvP. But people tend to overlook her awakening skills here. For the first skill, she actually gives a physical and magic defense reduction on enemies when she enters the battlefield. She also blinds enemies that hit her. So, you know, if you're playing PvP and then you're suddenly blinded, it's because you're hitting someone's Sohi. When she dies, she inflicts another physical and magic defense shred on enemies. When she enters the battlefield, she freezes enemies in the area. So this is such an overpowered pet for PvP. That's why I can't let go of her. No? It's just a very powerful PvP pet in my opinion. Definitely one of my favorites. It's just an A-tier pet. Alright, so I actually saved the skills for last because this is gonna be a little bit more complex than usual. So I'm gonna be wanting to talk more about how we switch stances, you know, with this particular tank build for the Royal Guard. But first, let me give you our full skill build. So for the Swordsman class, you can actually just go for whatever. It doesn't matter too much. But the ones that I chose are increased recuperative power. Sword Mastery, you don't really need, but you know, for some reason I put it there. It's not too important. I just didn't really know where else to put it. I have 10 on Provoke and 10 on Endure. Provoke and Sword Mastery, we won't necessarily be using too much as a tank class. So the only two skills that we'll actually be using here are Increased Recuperative Power and Endure. Now for the Crusader 3, it actually depends on what kind of tank Royal Guard you're going for. You can go for two routes. You can go for a more crowd control build, or you could go for a more pure support tank build for your party. So it really depends. So for my role right now as a tank Royal Guard, I'm actually doing more of a crowd control build now. So for the crowd control setup, we needed to sacrifice a few points of auto guard. So normally you would want this at level 10. Auto guard is a very powerful defensive skill. But I had to let go some of the points here to pursue the Holy Tree right here, because later on I will be going for Gloria Domini, which I use for additional crowd control. So right now what I have is level 1 riding, of course, for Cavalier Mastery 5, level 3 protection as a prerequisite later on, level 5 smite as a prerequisite for protection, 10 on Faith, 5 on Providence, and 5 on Auto Guard. And just enough points as prerequisites for Gloria Domini here on the Holy Skill Tree. So moving on to the Paladin skills, I do have level 10 Gloria Domini. That's why I had to give up the points of Auto Guard. And I also had to give up 1 point of Shield Reflect. So I only have Shield Reflect at level 9, Defending Aura at 5, 2 into Battle Chant, 5 into Fortitude. So now if you wanted to go for the more pure support tank setup, then you go for level 10 Auto Guard, none of these holy skills on the right, and you can go for level 10 Devotion. So normally you'd want to go for Devotion when you have a party member who's very strong or a hard carry who's very powerful that you can support as a Royal Guard. So we also have some of those in our guild, but right now my role is a different kind of Royal Guard. So I'm going for a little bit more crowd control. But the Devotion Royal Guard is also very powerful and very effective. With that setup, you can also go for more Battle Chant. So you'd be able to max out Auto Guard, Devotion, your shield skills, and your Battle Chant. And finally, we're at our Royal Guard skills. So Piety, of course, to unlock our skill tree. Excellent Stance, which is what will allow us to switch between our defense stance and our attack stance, which we'll be talking about more later on. But basically, receiving damage increases your defender's resolve. So this is the passive stacks that you get just like every other third job class. And dealing damage increases your attack, and dealing damage increases your warrior resolve. So he actually has two kinds of ultimates on this stance changing build, and you can actually use both simultaneously. So we'll be talking about that later on. For our main damage skill on the defender stance, we use Shield Press. So Shield Press is a single target attack, has a 20% chance to stun targets for 1 second, and damage from enemies hit by Shield Press is reduced by up to 60%. It has a cooldown of 1 second and a global cooldown of 1 second as well. So this is the skill that we're going to be spamming. We also have Earth Drive. So Earth Drive gives you a lot of buffs depending on how many enemies are hit by this. So this is an AoE in a cone shape. So if you hit up to 5 enemies, you get more magic and physical defense and also get a shield. Now we have King's Grace. So King's Grace is gonna be a skill that we're gonna be using manually. So we're not able to put this in our auto skills, which is fine because it is a very situational skill. So what happens is you pretty much put a shield in front of your character. You're not able to turn. You're not able to change the direction of where you place the shield. But when enemies hit your shield, you perform a counterattack which deals damage. But also, the damage you receive is reduced by another 60%. And party members within your area of effect also receives a 30% damage reduction as well. And to top things off, when you perform your counterattacks, you also heal. So every time you perform a counterattack, you restore 5% HP. The Royal Guard also has a Dispel skill just like most other third jobs now. So for the Royal Guard's Dispel skill, you remove all crowd control effects as well as knock back all surrounding enemies with Roar. We have another utility skill called Shield of God. So this is pretty much just a straight up damage reduction buff. So you get up to 20% physical and magic damage reduction. And every time you're hit, you have a 5% chance of gaining another shield worth 5% of your max HP. And we also finally have a movement skill which we did not have as Rune Knights. So we have a movement skill, Quick Slide. And finally, our ultimate, Decisive Domain. So for the defensive stance ultimate, you create a large AoE in which all of the allies inside the AoE, including yourself, receive a huge damage reduction buff. And enemies who attack you from outside your domain also deal reduced damage. So it's a very, very powerful defensive buff in a large AoE. But now I want to talk about changing stances. So changing stances will change all of your skills that we just talked about. So in the attack stance, your main attack skill is now Pinpoint Attack. So enemies hit with Pinpoint Attack will be applied the Pierce status, which will take effect up to 3 stacks. And each stack will reduce the damage that they deal by 15% up to 45%. And also, it will reduce their healing received by 40%. So basically, what happens is the defensive stance gives your party more buffs, while the attack stance gives the enemies more debuffs. So the Royal Guard is generally a very tanky utility class that's very versatile for many situations of combat. So your Earth Drive is now Holy Thrust. So what happens is you charge at the target, so it's another dash. It's kind of like the charge attack skill of the Lord Knight. So you dash towards the target, you also stun them for 1 second, also increases the succeeding stun durations by 50%. And if the target has the Pierce mark, you also gain a shield up to 20% of your max HP. And now your manual skill, which is now the Moon Slasher, definitely one of my favorite Royal Guard skills. You have another dash, you charge towards a target area, stunning them for 1.5 seconds, and then you enter the Moon Slasher state, in which you would be slashing nearby enemies with Gravity Slash, pulling them closer to you, and lasting for 7 seconds. So this is what it looks like. It's one of my favorite skills. Every time that slash goes off, you pull in enemies towards you. Kinda like how the Earth Lord pulls enemies in PvP towards itself. This is just the same thing. And for the attack stance Decisive Domain, you create another large AoE, in which case all enemies inside your domain receive an additional 30% physical or magic damage. Their move speed is reduced by 15%, and if they do try to leave your domain, they get stunned for 2 seconds. So like I said, the defensive stance is a more buff-oriented stance that buffs your party, gives you a lot of damage reduction, while the attack stance applies a lot of debuffs to the enemy. Both are equally powerful and you'd be using both depending on the situation, depending on what your combat scenario calls for. So that's why I'm super excited and super happy about this Royal Guard setup that we have now. This was definitely the tank class that I've been looking for since the start of Ragnarok Origin. So with all of that said, let me show you a few PvP clips that we've had so far from this week.
Go, go man, get inside man, go. Pasok natin dun. Let's go, go man, we push towards San. San, go San. Disengage, go San. Ganda, number natin yung dami na. Go. Manito, go. They got San. Go. Ah, they stole it. Towards. We'll be pushing towards Sun. I think I can go Sun. But it's just luck.
Yeah, it's just finish luck.
Yeah, okay, luck. Go Sun. I need more people in one. We need to go out again, guys.
Catching up.
Okay. It's luck. Okay, push towards Sun. Let's reduce later, right? Sorry guys. Just make sure you're inside, guys. Make sure you're inside. Keep pressing your member.
I know not it. Lock. Nice, G.
Frappuccino kid the boss earlier.
Gusto ka, yung ganito eh.
Yung ultima, pagka next-next ka.
Okay na. Yan.
Sana, di ba yung ka para ma-stand?
Ito, nakadra. Yan na. Oh! Ano? Man! Uli!
Yan, nakuha niya na yung push!
Let's go!
Ayayin niya si Chinen.
Kahit ito, sinasalo ko sila. Nahold ko sila. Push na! Yan, push na! Sino ang hold ko? If you've made it this far and you enjoy the content, consider liking and subscribing. We're going to be continuing to make more videos and more guides, but if you have any suggestions whatsoever, please do let me know in our comment section down below. Turn on that notification bell so you don't miss out on our new videos. Hope to see you all on the next one.